love. When the Apostle Paul is teaching to these men and women in Corinth, he doesn't bring up the Old Testament as though it's something that happened to other people. He brings it up as something that you should be excited about as well. That this wasn't something to divide, but something to unite. I fear that churches, in our eagerness to be comfortable, have sought the exclusion of others, rather than talking to people in a way that they understand. We have draped our language in Christianese, and there are things that are just normal to us, but we don't seem to really care about how it impacts other people or about how other people understand what's being talked about. There are words that have a very specific meaning to us that don't mean that same thing on a larger scale. One of those is going to pop up into our story today. And so let's open our Bibles to the book of Corinthians, chapter 10, verse 1. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. Now, you might read that and be like, oh, obviously, I don't want you to not know this, but if you remember who it is that Paul is talking to, he is talking not only to Jewish people, he is talking to the Gentile community. These are people who have been excluded from synagogue. These are people who are not the right sort and have been pushed to the edges of society. They've been told they eat the wrong things, dress the wrong way, listen to the wrong music. They have been told in no uncertain terms that they are not part of what God is doing. The Apostle Paul begins and he calls everyone, Gentile or Jew, brother. For the Christian to remember that all people are made in the image of God is a beginning. We do not view people as white people or black people or rich people or poor people or Bradford people or Newton people, but we look at each of you and we recognize that there is internal, holy worth in every soul. Regardless of what language they speak or how tall they are or who their family is, every soul is holy because it is made by God on purpose and for a purpose. Everyone is called to the cross. Now, is everyone following Jesus? No, they're not. Is everyone at peace with God who made them? No, they're not. But my view of them should not be shaped by their view of me. Church must begin with the love of God, with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my might. And the second is like the first, that I might love my neighbor. How? As myself. Do you know what I do for myself? I feed myself regularly. I make sure that I have the proper temperature. I even have an Amazon wish list just for me. Just for me. Sometimes my wife will add things to the Amazon wish list, and you know what it does? It messes up everything. I get recommendations about hair products that I will not buy. I get recommendations. I remember do you remember when the Kindle came out? The little reading booklet. I'm from West Virginia, okay? There aren't bookstores. So when I got a Kindle and I recognized I could buy any book with the click of a button, it was a big deal. And I was buying books like crazy. And then I found out there were free books that I could just keep pushing buttons, and they arrived on my Kindle. I was all about it until my wife got one, but we shared an account. All of a sudden, instead of getting really interesting books that I was interested in, I got all these romance novels. You might be interested in this. No, I am not. You read this. No, I did not. And all of a sudden, this thing that was intended to play to my interests, I was sharing with someone else, someone who I loved very much. But I loved them outside of my reading list. The idea of sharing space, you don't believe me. Don't you remember when you shared a room with your sister? Love her to death. Love her most when she lives in another state. Love her to death when she's not taking my stuff. There's something about closeness that creates friction. But we have to be able to tell the difference between gentle teasing between brothers and genuine unwelcomeness within the body of Christ. Paul begins in this book by saying, I've heard that there are divisions among you. There are always going to be divisions among us. The only way to overcome divisions is to love that person more than you love the thing that divides you. It is to look at that person and not see an other, but to look at that person and see a brother. I want you to know that this story of the Jewish people is not only a story of the Jewish people, but it is a story for the world through the Jewish people. He says, all of our fathers were under the cloud. They passed through the sea. What he's talking about here is the Exodus, ex-hados, the road out. That's what it means. It's the story of how they were freed from slavery in Egypt. And it's a story of fantastic wonders and spiritual frightening moments. Do you remember the name of the bad guy in the story? We actually don't know his name. It was taken from him. We just call him Pharaoh, which is like calling him evil king. It's not that he didn't have a name. It's that in an effort to lift up the lowly, they took away the name of the powerful. Suddenly, we remember the names of Miriam. We remember the names of Aaron. We remember the names of Zipporah, but we don't know the name of the most powerful man in the world at the time. Our world has a tendency to show respect to those that wield power and to silence those who are unimportant. Our church should be a place where all are valued and loved. Because Christ died for you, I also should die for you. Because Christ lived for you, I also should seek to live for you. I should seek to honor others, esteem them better than myself. That means that I look for opportunities to be a blessing, a way to serve others and not to be served. This is the way of the kingdom of heaven. But it doesn't fit well in the nations of earth. We're used to getting our way because we forced it. We pushed it. We're used to looking at other people and asking, what can they do for us, rather than living a life that desires to be a blessing. You guys are looking for a school bus, right? It's not going to fix itself. You're actually going to have somebody out there who knows what they're doing, and you're going to say, here is my bus, and here is some money, make it roll places. But what you're not going to be able to do is just wait for good things to happen to your bus. It's not going to work. You can have the best intentions. You can go out every day and sing a happy song and give that bus a brand new wash and wax it make it look so nice. But unless you seek to make the bus work, it will always have problems. If you seek church as something which you just participate in, and you show up and you're waiting for good things to happen in your life, you're waiting for God to do good things in other people's lives, you're going to be waiting a very long time. Because it is God's desire that we seek to serve one another. I love that Paul begins this passage by calling them brothers and bringing them into the story. It isn't just positive thought. It isn't just waiting for good things to happen. It is seeking to be a blessing. One of my favorite things in all the Gospels is the giving of the Beatitudes, where he talks about these things not as something which may be achieved one day, but this is what God made you to be. God has died for you. Now God lives for you. And every day that I get up and I get around people, I'm going to rub them the wrong way, and they're going to rub me the wrong way. And at the end of any sort of length of time, we're going to need to sit down and say, listen, I think I messed up. Do you forgive me? And vice versa. What stops that from happening is the pride. The pride, that sense of self-entitlement, which grows so very easy in my garden. I have a raised bed, and I'm planning to grow cucumbers this year and less tomatoes. I planted a cherry tomato. I planted 2 cherry tomatoes. God knows no one needs 2 cherry tomatoes because one of them will fill in. I could have fed the whole county with these things. They just kept growing and growing and growing. I'm pulling them out of the other tomato plants. I mean, it just went nuts. But if I actually had a plant that I was really excited about and I planted, it wouldn't grow. I can grow dandelions like crazy. I can grow crabgrass like nuts. You know why? Because crabgrass is native to my garden. Dandelions grow, and I remember I tried to pull one up. You ever pull up a dandelion? Man, if ever there was a thing that I want to be like a dandelion. You pull it up, and this is in my our raised bed, and I'm not kidding. The flower on it, it's a little tiny thing, but the taproot on that thing it was gigantic. That thing was going to thrive unless something was done to stop it. It was the kind of thing that had put down roots. I had prepared the ground, but not for that dandelion. I hadn't prepared the place for that many tomatoes. And it got to the point where I began to look at all those cherry tomatoes as a problem and not as a fruit. I began to see this as a weed rather than as a blessing. Normally that happens somewhere around July. You're excited that it's growing, and then you're like, please stop. Please stop, and it just grows all over the place. Typically that happens because we haven't been paying attention to it. All of a sudden you notice that things have got a little bit crazy. I have a 7-year-old at my house. Do you know how fast things get crazy? Very. I clean up the room, I clean up the house. Erin will be gone for a little bit. She'll go to the store. My job when Erin leaves the house is survival. Make sure the child survives, make sure the house survives, make sure the dog doesn't run away, and that's how I judge whether I'm successfully parenting. But when Erin comes home, all the things that she put away or that we put away, they're back where they don't belong. There are Legos in every piece of furniture that I own. Every one. And I regularly go through them. If I'm looking for the remote control at my house, I don't begin by looking on the table. I begin by looking in the cushions. That's because life is happening. And when life is happening, it doesn't always look neat. It looks like things are changing. It looks like things are moving. The Jewish people really desired to freeze this in time. Our story. Me and my people. And what they forgot was that the purpose of Exodus was that God came to people at all. That he had not only come to the Jewish people, but that he had come through them to the world. Is it their story? Yes. It's beautiful. I shouldn't try to steal it, to make it mine, or pretend that they don't have a place in it. But I should also recognize what Paul is doing here, that he is seeking to reach through the past and into the present. Perhaps you've had moments where people showed the love of Christ and didn't just say it, where you felt truly valued, not because of what you could bring, but because someone genuinely loved you. That, I feel, is the beginning of chapter 10. It is a purposeful inclusion of the excluded. Now, am I always going to understand everybody? No. There's 1,000 things I don't get, and there are things that drive me nuts. And unless I purposefully try, I'm going to fail. One of my favorite verses in the whole Bible says, Lord, put a guard on my mouth. We're coming up on March Madness, right? Gallant guess, I know you're out there. We're going to have the bracket. We're going to have the who's got the best bracket and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to come in a solid last place again. I expect all these things. But to guard someone doesn't happen accidentally. It is a purposeful thing that has to be trained into kids. If they're going to guard something, you have to purposefully expect there to be a problem. Most of us don't guard our words because we have no interest in what they do. You throw your words out there as though the world owes a beating from your mouth. Christ asks us to take control of our tongue, to use who and what we are, not simply for the loving of people who we genuinely like, but for the protecting of the places in which we live. I will probably plant 2 cherry tomatoes again, and I will probably complain about it. I will complain about it. But I plant 2 because I get so excited that winter is over that I can't help myself. No one else has this problem? I like gardening. I think this way. Sometimes we bite off more than we can chew. That's true. But I fear that for many Christians, we haven't put much thought at all into how our life affects the lives of others. We sent down a whole passel of kids just now down into the children's church. The way that they see Jesus will largely depend on the way that you live Jesus. If they feel like you have not included them, they will push away. And it is not Christ that has forsaken us, but it is we who have forsaken one another. I want to get into this text. We're going to see the word baptism is going to come up here. It says, look at the next verse. I'm going to wrap this up. It says, we were all what? Baptized into? Well, hang on a second. I don't remember being baptized into Moses, do you? As a matter of fact, I don't remember him coming up at all in the whole scenario. What's he talking about? Baptized into Moses. What's this connection back into the past? And what does it have to do with the world and the church that Paul was dealing with right there in Corinth? It has to do, let me say it very basically, is this. Paul is loving his neighbor how? As himself. He is saying, not my past, but ours. Not my hopes, but ours. There is a world that exists outside of self. And the church that Paul is teaching here, not just the Corinthian church, but the church globally, must embrace this idea, not of being served, but of serving. Is every man my brother? Well, it depends on what you mean. I actually have a physical brother. His name's Pat. He's a state trooper. Nice guy. Unless you're speeding, then he's not a nice guy. I have other people who are brothers. You know, there's this extended family that I have. There are also people who I call brothers because we follow Jesus together. There's this sense of family. But there is also a sense in which I am made by God to be a blessing in the world that I live. It is hard to do that on your best days. It will be doubly hard when you're grouchy, or when traffic is slow, or when your team is getting clobbered, or when things aren't going your way. If we are to succeed in loving one another, it must be purposefully done. It must be sought, or it will not be found. The bus is a great example of this. You may know how to fix the bus. You may have an idea that the bus needs fixed. But unless effort is taken to achieve the goal, it will remain a glorified paperweight. I'm sure it's not a paperweight. I'm sure it's great. It's a nice one. But it's going to take constant work. Family is this. Husband, your relationship with your wife will not always be easy. Your relationship with your children will not always be easy. I asked Craig today at what point children stopped complaining. He told me 12. I'm excited about that. Like there's a hard cutoff. I think he may have lied to me, though, to be honest with you. He just wanted me to feel better about myself and my life. So I'm excited about it, you know. But it takes effort. We're getting ready to move out of winter and into spring. Spring is a time for cleaning. Spring is a time for planting. Spring is a time of new life and new hopes. Take the time to not only clean your home, but as we did today, by the breaking of bread, clean your heart. Examine yourself. See if you be in the faith. Forgive as you have been forgiven. Father, we didn't get very far, but we got a lot done. To be able to break bread with my brothers and my sisters is a joy. To hear about the hopes of these folks serving in Bradford is a joy. Even to get to watch the video was a joy. Bless this people. Bless them, Lord. And as they study to show themselves approved, workmen that need not be ashamed, may they rightly divide the words of truth. May they view themselves as trees planted by water. May they be a refreshment, a joy, a bringer of goodness to the world and community in which they live, because we are filled with your Spirit. May we know that there is no salvation apart from you, and may we seek to show your gospel to the world in which we live. Amen. Stand up.